Hello and welcome back to the Life Nurse podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the LVMH watch week that occurred last week. We're going to discuss some of the novelties that were released by the 9 participating brands. And as always, there will be links in the show notes of this podcast for you to read more about each of these watches. And I want to provide a link to sort of an in-depth introduction on something that I think is quite cool. So check out the links if you want to see some of the pictures of the watches that we're going to be discussing. So LVMH Watch Week was first came about in 2020. It was hosted in Dubai, where 4 brands, Bulgari, Hublot, Tag Heuer, and Zenith, all used this time to showcase some of the watches that they were going to release for that specific calendar year. And what this has happened is this has grown to some of the other LVMH brands, and from those 4, there were an additional 6 that were included, including Daniel Roth, which is a brand that was acquired and has become quite important in the lineup of LVMH watch brands, as well as Gerald Genta. And then there were also 3 other companies that were, brands, watch manufacturers, that were added to the list this year. One was Louis Vuitton, the second was Tiffany & Co., and then the third was Lepe, which is a brand that I absolutely adore. So this year there were a bunch of different watches that were showcased, and I want to go through each of the different brands and the watches that they released. So I'll start off. I'm kind of following along in the Revolution Watch article. I encourage you to go to the article so you can see the pictures. And I think this is done in alphabetical order. So the first brand that I'll talk about is Bulgari. They released the Serpenti Seduttori Automatic, as well as the Serpenti Tubogas Automatic. And what's iconic about this line is this is the first self-winding time-only movement for their ladies' collection of watches. If you don't know the Serpenti design from Bulgari, it's this sort of kind of a bracelet that is very similar to obviously a serpent in design, and it wraps around one's arm and then has the time at sort of where the head of the serpent would be. And most of these pieces have had quartz movements in them, and this is obviously the first time that they are releasing the caliber BVS 100 Lady Solo Tempo, which is, as I mentioned, the first self-winding time-only movement. I think this is a good step in the right direction. It definitely hits home with watch enthusiasts or people who are looking for mechanical movements in their watches. What's quite interesting about this, though, is, in such quite a delicate watch, a lot of the times what you see brands doing is releasing manual wind movements in these types of watches. But I like the idea that this has an automatic movement. It makes it a lot easier for the wearer, and so for those who maybe don't get super excited about winding a watch every single day, it allows for this watch to remain perpetually powered up and charged and ready to go, and I think is a nice move in a cool direction, especially sort of like a watchmaking direction for us watch enthusiasts. Second brand that had a release was Daniel Roth, and this was the Extra Plate Suscription, which is I think their second release. This is a limited edition piece that's limited to 20 in yellow gold, and it pays homage to Roth's ultra-thin C107 and C167 models from the early 1990s. I believe the dimensions of this watch are identical to these pieces, although there have been some modifications that have happened to the lugs, as well as the new hand-wound caliber, the DR002, that is a time-only caliber with a 65-hour power reserve. Super beautiful watch, very nice hobnail guilloche dial with a solid gold base and a nice chapter ring where you have your seconds movement. You have obviously the Daniel Roth name in blue at the top of the dial. You have the numbered edition at 6 o'clock, and then you have this very nice Roman numeral printed dial and blued hands. That's quite nice. No seconds. A very attractive looking piece, and I think a good step for Daniel Roth, where they are using historical pieces to inspire what they're producing now, and not sort of going down the path of producing something that's completely new and not true to the original essence of the brand. Gerald Genta released the Gentissima Orsin Fire Opal, which is the fourth iteration of this series. It's a 36mm yellow gold 3N case with a quite a nice glass blasted finish, and then it also has 137 fire opals that are secured by yellow gold pins. This is I'd say this is a watch that is not for everyone. It's quite artistic, quite artisanal. I'd say it also is more perhaps on the sort of jewelry side of things. It runs on the Zenith Elite movement, the GG005 Zenith Elite movement that has an hours and minutes hand. The hours hands actually remind me of sort of Patek Philippe shape, and comes on a black leather strap. As I mentioned, this is definitely towards the sort of jewelry side of things, but a cool, somewhat off the beaten path release from LVMH. Hublot was also present. They had a series of different watches they released. They had the Big Bang Tourbillon Automatic Green Saxum, the Big Bang Mecha 10, which is a redesign, I believe, and then the Spirit of the Big Bang Chronograph, as well as the Spirit of the Big Bang Year of the Snake. So most of these pieces are produced in limited edition. They played around with some case metals, especially with the Green Saxum, where they have this green sapphire case that has been produced, a limited edition of 18 pieces with their caliber MHU B6035 caliber with a micro rotor and 60-second tourbillon at 6 o'clock. That's finished entirely in black. That really contrasts quite nicely with the green. As I mentioned, the Big Bang Mecha introduced a new caliber, which is the HUB 1205 movement, and I think shrunk the size of the case down to 42 millimeters, which makes it a little bit more wearable. Obviously, this is going to be very sporty in its looks. It maintains the 10-day power reserve from their twin mainsprings, and it also includes a rack-driven power reserve indicator, which is quite cool. The Spirit of the Big Bang is something that looks very similar to that of the Richard Mille's that have been released. They have these new 42mm ceramic chronograph models in dark green, sky blue, as well as beige. And each of these comes with an open work dial and then has sort of a mix of polished and microblasted finishing. Again, these ones being limited to 200 pieces per color. I think this is going after those who are interested in sort of this sporty look and those who kind of like that RM feel. And then the last piece that they released was the Spirit of Big Bang Year of the Snake. So obviously this RM sort of inspiration, but it's limited to 88 pieces, incorporates this snake scale pattern on the bezel and strap, and has a golden serpent motif that winds throughout the dial with the head of the serpent at 12 o'clock. So this is obviously in tribute to the snake's sort of symbolic meaning in the Chinese zodiac, which is wisdom, charm, and transformation, and obviously is, I would say, was produced for that specific market. Overall, for me, Big Bang the Hublot is not really a brand that I follow too closely. It's kind of not really my aesthetic when it comes to modern watches. Some of you may like it, definitely a lot more on the sporty side. You do see a lot of sportsmen wearing these specific pieces, and I do think that Hublot has produced maybe a couple of movements that are quite interesting. For example, that 10-day power reserve is quite innovative. Moving on to Louis Vuitton, they released the Tambour Taiko Spin Time and the Tambour Convergence. I really love the Tambour Convergence. I'll get to that in a second. But with the Spin Time, essentially what they have, there's two different models. There's the Hawkseye dial, which is sort of this almost like grayish dial where you have each of the hour indicators that will spin. And then you have the Tyco Spin Time Air Antipod, which has a completely clear dial and back case, and then it also incorporates a world time movement. Both of these are fitted with the LFT ST1301 caliber that has 45 hours of power reserve, and there are there's a version of the Spin Time Air models that have sort of diamond versions for these pieces that have 100 stones set across its surface. So a kind of a cool conceptual design, and I think are definitely a different way of sort of reading the time when you have these indicators that sort of spin around the dial. The watch that I really like is the Tambor Convergence, which it's Louis Vuitton's debut of this specific watch. And what this basically is a dragging hours and minutes time-only piece. And so what you have is a 37 millimeter rose gold or diamond set platinum case that houses their caliber LFT MA01.01, and it displays sort of this Art Deco inspired digital display where you have a dragging hours and minutes apertures at where 12 o'clock would typically be. I am a huge fan of sort of the classic looking design of this specific watch, and I think one of the other things that I really like about this piece is the lug design. The lugs are not super long, they curve nicely towards the wrist, but they also, if you look at them from the side profile, they have a hollowed in the inside of the lug is hollow, so you have quite an elegant sort of what it looks like is sort of a bent gold sort of wing for the lugs, and I think it's very attractive as well. When you look at the hours and minutes indicators, the text is in blue, really great contrast with the rose gold, and I think really well executed by Louis Vuitton. So I have to give them that for sure. TAG Heuer was also busy this year. They released a couple of limited editions. I'm not going to go through all of them because they did have quite a few releases. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is they came out with a couple Carrera models. They came out with the TAG Heuer Carrera chronograph with a tourbillon variant that's limited to 200 pieces and powered by the TG 20-00 movement. It's 42 millimeters in diameter and has a really nice sort of I call it smoky purple dial, I think is how they describe it. Very elegantly done. I think at 42 millimeters, it might be, I haven't tried it on, but for me, when I try on 42 millimeter pieces, sometimes it fits a little bit larger on my wrist, but I think it's a fairly good size for most watch people who are interested in watches. There's only 200 of them. I'm sure that they have all been allocated at this point. A very nice example. And then they also came out with two 39 millimeter models, 39 millimeter models with this purple to black sort of sunray dials that I think is quite attractive as well. One of the lines that they did a complete redesign to is the Formula One, where they expanded to a 44 millimeter titanium chronograph with 5 different colors. This is quite an interesting move and sort of highlights I think a lineup of watches that maybe wasn't getting a lot of interest, but I think what they've produced here is a watch that could be interesting to sort of the mass market, I would say. As watch enthusiasts, maybe it's not something that you would like if you're deeply into the brand of TAG Heuer or into sort of sports watches, but I do think if someone new to watches walked into a TAG Heuer boutique or, one of the boutiques around, they would likely stumble on this watch and be quite interested in what it has to offer, given its very sporty feel, very sort of modern, and not too... It looks like a watch that could be used and not the wearer doesn't have to be too careful with it on the wrist. All right, Tiffany released a couple of watches. I'm going to skip Tiffany if that's okay. Most of the pieces are not really to my taste. A lot of them are maybe a little bit more towards the jewelry side of watches. Just to give you an idea, they have one of the pieces, which is called Bird on the Rock Full Pavé Diamond watch, has beautiful 1,362 round brilliant diamonds on a 36 millimeter white gold case and bracelet. And then it has sort of a bird that's perched towards where 6 o'clock is located. That kind of gives you the idea of what a lot of the pieces they released were. This is definitely sort of towards maybe the female audience that would be purchasing watches. They're very, very nice pieces. I don't know about the movements that are used in them. I'm going to just quickly see if there is information about the movements. I don't really see anything about the specific movements, but very, very elegant pieces, beautiful jewelry pieces, and if you're shopping in Tiffany, this is probably something that one would stumble upon for maybe their spouse or for themselves. Zenith, I think, was a huge, I'm not going to say controversial, I'll say they definitely were in news when it came to the releases for them this year. They showcased two novelties. They had the Defy Skyline chronograph skeleton, which is one of their steel sports watches that has a really nice sporty shape to it, very, very similar to a lot of the pieces that you can think of. Audemars Piguet, Royal Oak, the Overseas, the reference 222, the Nautilus, very, very similar sort of case construction. Obviously, this one has a skeleton dial, which is something that they have been waiting, or I guess people have been waiting for this to be released. But I think the biggest news from Zenith was the Chronomaster Sport Rainbow, which is essentially their Chronomaster Sport chronograph with the El Primero movement. And what they did is added a little bit of color to it. And so what they have is a graduating baguette cut sapphire bezel that has colors around the outside of the dial. And then they have the matching colors as hour indicators with 10 diamonds on the inside of the watch. The colors obviously go from orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, pink. And kind of makes this fairly sporty watch a little bit more dressy. Now, as you can imagine, what you're probably thinking is, oh, the Rainbow Daytona. I think that's something that a lot of people liken this watch to. It's very, very similar to a lot of the different rainbow watches that have been released over the last several years. This is obviously Zenith's version of their sort of rainbow-inspired motif. I would say that this is an interesting move by Zenith to maybe follow in the footsteps of other brands and produce a watch that would be essentially in competition with some of these other baguette-inspired sort of rainbow watches. This is definitely not my taste. I'm not a huge fan of this. It's just not, something that I would personally wear. I think the criticism that it has received is it's essentially the Rainbow Daytona. It's not innovative at all. It's less costly than the Rainbow Daytona, so obviously the market is a little bit larger for this specific watch. So, I can't pass too much judgment on this. I think it's just a watch that was released by Zenith to cater to people who are looking for this sort of aesthetic in their watches, and I can't criticize them for that. The one thing that I do find really interesting is there is a date complication on this watch, and it's located between 4 and 5 o'clock. You can hardly see it. Like it's so not visible on the dial, in my opinion, with all of these bright baguette diamonds. I don't understand why they left that there. I feel like you could have removed it and it would have been totally fine. However, it is an additional complication and something that people might find useful. So I understand why they might have left it with the in the watch. Let me know if you want to discuss the Rainbow Daytona. I'm saying Rainbow Daytona. If you want to discuss the Chronomaster Sport Rainbow, please send us a message. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. There'll be links in the show notes to all of our social medias as well as our website. So just choose one of those and send us a message, because I would love to hear your thoughts genuinely on this specific watch. All right, the last piece that I wanted to discuss was the Lepe 1839 watch box that was released. It's the first time that Lepe exhibited at LVMH Watch Week, and what they presented was the watch box. And it essentially is a watch box. And what it is, it's a transparent acrylic glass watch box that allows you to place your watch in this watch. And obviously you can see it's displayed really nicely. But what's really cool about this watch is there's a button that you can press, and what happens is there's a mechanical lifting system that raises the wristwatch as the cover opens, and then closes the case when you take your watch out of the watch box, and then rewinds the internal mechanism as the wristwatch is being lowered into the place where the watch would be placed. While it's being lowered, it will rewind the movement. I just love Lepe. Lepe has done some collaborations with MB&F that I really, really love. I think this is true craftsmanship, true fine artisanal work, and I was skeptical about the acquisition from LVMH. I think they acquired them or purchased a stake in them. I was a little bit skeptical because I thought they were going to lose sort of that true craftsmanship that this brand really does have. But I like that this is another example of how you can get this. Now it's fairly costly. It's about 10,000 Swiss francs, which is fairly costly for a watch box. But I think a little bit beyond that on what Lepe is trying to do to use these mechanical mechanisms in the things that they're created. That's why I think it's really nice. As I mentioned, I wanted to provide a full article where this mechanical object is discussed. And so there'll be a link in the description to Hodinkie's article where they go through their sort of introducing series, where they talk about how the watch box is constructed and those types of things. So check it out. Because it's super, super cool. And if you don't know Lepe, I encourage you to go into the archives of Life on the Wrist and search Lepe's name, or do some research on your own, because it's just, they're such a cool brand, and some of the things that they've done with MB&F are truly, truly amazing. So those are all the brands. I'll also leave a link in the show notes of this podcast to Hodinkie's sort of coverage of LVMH Watch Week. It's quite interesting to have them covering Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy's Watch Week, being that they're owned by Watches of Switzerland. But they have a cool article, which is sort of 5 takeaways from the week. And I think it's pretty well written. Some interesting takeaways are discussed. And yeah, I think it's just a good source to get information about the brands that launched these pieces to kind of mark the calendar year of what they are going to be producing. So I'll leave a link in the show notes of this podcast for you to check that out. With that said, I think we're going to wrap up this episode of the Life on the Wrist podcast. If you are new to the Life on the Wrist podcast, be sure to follow us and share this podcast with a friend who might be interested in watch podcasts. It really does helps me grow this podcast and get more people listening to the hopefully informational content that we're producing about the watch industry. There will also be links, as I mentioned throughout the podcast, to all the articles that we spoke about during this episode, as well as our social medias and our website. So be sure to check out the show notes for all that information. If you wouldn't mind liking this podcast, it really does help me out, and it helps grow this podcast on all the platforms that it is being being streamed on. And if you are feeling generous and wouldn't mind rating this podcast, it really does help me out. It also provides me with feedback on how I can adapt this show to better suit what you want to hear on a weekly basis. So be sure to rate us. With that said, guys, thank you so much for listening to this podcast, and until next time.